killed 7 men.
Yes, you
And
did.
I'm asking you, what got you to kill the 7
And
men?
I'm telling you because the cops let me keep killing them, Nick.
There's a terrifying reality out there. Serial killers can exist in the form of someone's husband, son, or brother. And by the time they're taken into custody, they've already done unimaginable damage. Here are 10 cases of serial killers in which horrifying details of their crimes were uncovered only after they were arrested. Samuel Little, a convicted serial killer, claimed to have killed 93 individuals between 1970 and 2005. The FBI referred to him as the most prolific serial killer in US history, after more than 60 murders were confirmed. There's a reason he stayed off the radar for so long. Many of his victims were outcasts of society, including drug users, sex workers, homeless individuals, and people of color. The following footage shows him speaking about one of his victims, known as Marianne.
And tell me about where you met her at.
I seen her down at the Guar on 17th Avenue, and she had on a short cream miniskirt. Cream and red. So then this opportunity popped up. Take her to the store.
Now where'd you take her to?
Continue down 27. Got back on 27.
Going outside of Miami.
Miami.
Going away from Miami.
Going away from Miami.
Marianne was a transgender woman whom Samuel lured into his car under the pretense of taking her to his apartment, but he ended up taking her out of Miami instead. After this, he recounts the horrific crime.
Got her out of the car, pulled her out, and drug her into the growths back there, and pulled her deeper into there's a path. A little path was running somewhere. I don't know where it led it to, but it was running deeper into the undergrowth. It's like Everglades like that. And we ran into some water running. But before we got to the water, the earth was mushy. I turned her loose, and she fell into it face down.
And how far outside of Miami do you think you were?
About a mile, 2 miles.
He killed her on the highway next to a sugarcane field and then explained how he dumped her body in a marshy area, after which it was never found. Samuel Little was sentenced to life in prison, where he eventually died. While Samuel seemed unstable, serial killer Edmund Kemper gave off the impression of the perfect child, but was jailed at the age of 15 for killing both of his grandparents in an attempt to see what it felt like. Even after being freed, he killed 6 young ladies in Santa Cruz, California. Following is an interview from 1984, which allows us a peek into Edmund's depravity.
My mother was a sick, angry, hungry, and very sad woman. I hated her, but I wanted to love my mother. And I watched the alcohol increase, I watched her social life drop off, I watched her get bizarre. She had terrible pain from her life.
Edmund explains how his traumatized childhood and staggering relationship with his mother laid the basis for the decisions he later made in life. However, it can in no way, shape, or form be considered a justification for what he's done. After that, he explains his first killings of 2 female roommates. The serial killer took the 2 young women down to a secluded area, led one of them out of the car, killed her in the woods, and then came back to the other one pretending an accident had happened with her friend. He then proceeds to kill her too and stuffs her body into the trunk.
She's about to die. Why does she have to know that? I couldn't deal with telling her that. And when I attacked her, she didn't at first realize what was happening. It didn't go through. She had very heavy coveralls on. It knocked her right up into the lid of the car, but it didn't pierce the clothing. So it wasn't that swell a knife anyway. I went out and bought a pawn shop huge knife, and I kept on just mindlessly attacking. She falls back into the trunk. I just killed a young woman. I slammed down the lid of the trunk. She isn't dead, she's dying. And I panicked. I thought, I just locked the car keys in it because I can't find them in my pocket. Oh my God, I locked them in the trunk.
Today, Edmund Kemper is being held in prison to pay for his crimes. But Not all killers are as intellectually sound as Ed was, as before his 2012 arrest, American serial killer Israel Keyes was believed to have killed at least 11 victims and was considered the most terrifying killer of the 21st century. Rather than having a specific victim type in mind, Keyes usually traveled to different locations and chose victims based on chance. In the following interview on November 29, 2012, Keyes' evil side rears its ugly colors.
The search for the body. As far as the public knows, they can't even definitively say that it was a homicide. I know they already told everybody it was. They know that. Right, they know so Vermont.
Keyes can be seen spinning elaborate tales in front of the lawyers to avoid getting a sentence, as he questions whether the public really knows that all the victims were in fact homicides. But the lawyer reminds him that the city is aware of everything he has done. On December 2nd, 2012, while being held in jail at the Anchorage Correctional Complex, Keyes took his own life. From one horrifying killer to the next, Dennis Rader, dubbed the BTK Killer, which stands for Bind, Torture, and killed 10 people in the Wichita, Kansas area between 1974 and 1991. As a part of his twisted hobbies, he frequently left behind hints to tease law enforcement. In this interview, Dennis recalls the harrowing details of the trauma he inflicted on one victim's family. Dennis remembers how he entered the Otero family's house and immediately took the family hostage at gunpoint. After that, he guided them to the bedroom where he tied them up, and at the end, he murdered them one by one.
Joseph Otero Sr., Mr. Otero, the father.
Put a plastic bag over his head and then some cords and tighten it.
This was in the bedroom?
Yes, sir. After that, I did Mrs. Otero. I had never strangled anyone before, so I really didn't know how much pressure you had to put on a person or how long it would take. But at that time, the whole family just went panicked on me, so I worked pretty quick.
Pretty quick?
Well, I mean, I strangled Mrs. Otero, and she went out, or passed out. I thought she was dead. She passed out. And I strangled Josephine. She passed out. Well, I thought she was dead. And then I went over and put a bag on Junior's head.
Today, he serves 10 consecutive life sentences in Kansas prison. While Dennis wasn't a sex offender, the same can't be said about Anthony Soule, also known as the Cleveland Strangler, who was a convicted sexual offender who served 15 years in prison for kidnapping, rape, and killing 11 women between 2007 and 2009. After the murders, he hid or buried their corpses in his garden and house. In the following testimony Anthony provided in court, we see a side of a serial killer that is rarely seen.
The only thing I want to say is that I'm sorry. I know that might not sound like much, but I truly am sorry from the bottom of my heart. This is not typical of me. I don't know what happened, I can't explain it. But I know it's not a lot, but that's all I can give you.
Anthony can be seen apologizing to the jury, and the families of the victims sat there in court on that day. However, he doesn't excuse the horrendous crimes he has committed. Anthony eventually passed away in prison while serving his sentence. Shifting from female victims to male victims, between 1978 and 1991, American serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 men and boys. Over the course of more than 13 years, Dahmer stalked his victims, mostly black men, at gay bars, shopping centers, and bus stations. He then offered them booze laced with drugs, enticed them home with promises of money or sex, and strangled them to death. In this interview, Jeffrey Dahmer explains the mindset behind his killings. Jeffrey tells the interviewer how killing was not the main goal. Rather, he was trying to completely dominate his victim.
My only objective was to find the best-looking guy that I could. I went to bathhouses, I went to bars, shopping malls. Their sexual preference didn't matter to me.
Was it the killing that excited you, or is it what happened after the killing?
No, the killing was just a means to an end. That was the least satisfactory part. I didn't enjoy doing that. That's why I tried to create living zombies.
The reference to a zombie in the end references a gruesome method Jeffrey would employ, in which he would drill a hole in victim's head and pour acid down it in an attempt to bring the person back to life. Jeffrey was eventually killed in 1994 by a prison mate. The case that stands out the most is of Aileen Wuornos, a female serial killer who lived as a prostitute before she was convicted of killing 6 men in Florida in 1989 and 1990. Her murderous rampage began in late November 1989, earning her the nickname Damsel of Death. In her last interview, Aileen made a very shocking statement.
I'm all right with it, but like I said, remember, let them know that I know that the cops knew who I was. After Richard Mallory died, I left prints everywhere and they covered it up and let me kill the rest of those guys to turn me into a serial killer. I know they did, because I was no professional serial killer or anything. I'm a murderer, whatever you want to call it, you know.
The things Aileen says are very surprising indeed, as she claims that she was allowed to go on her killing spree by the police knowingly. She also explains in the interview how she was abused sexually and physically, which is what led her to commit the murders.
Nonetheless,
Yeah.
you killed 7 men.
Yes, you
And I'm
did.
asking you, what got you to kill the 7
And
men?
I'm telling you because the cops let me keep killing them, Nick. Don't
Yeah,
you
but
get it?
Not everybody is killing 7 people. So there must have been something in you that was getting you to
Oh,
do
you
that.
are lost, Nick.
So
I was a
explain-
hitchhiking hooker.
Right.
Running into trouble. I shoot the guy if I ran into trouble. Physical trouble. The cops knew it. When the physical trouble came along, let her clean the streets, and then we'll pull her in.
But how
That's
come
why.
there was so...
As a consequence of her actions, she was executed by lethal injection in 2002. From a prostitute being a predator to being a prey, Gary was the one targeting prostitutes this time. Before being arrested in 2001, serial killer Gary Ridgway, also referred to as the Green River Killer, killed at least 49 women in the state of Washington. In this interview, Gary recalls the ruses he would employ to get his female victims to trust him.
A woman would get in the car.
She's already in the car?
She's in the car. Let's say she's always in the car. We're driving down the road, and she wants to see my ID. So I whipped out my ID, and with my ID would be I'd put my finger over my driver's license to hide my name. But on the opposite side was pictures. And a picture of my son. And then to see my son, and they would know I was probably a normal person.
Gary cold-heartedly explains how he would show his ID with a picture of his son at the side so that the women in his car would lower their guard and trust him entirely. Gary entered a plea bargain to save himself from the death penalty by revealing all details of his murders and the locations of the bodies, and was eventually sentenced to 48 consecutive life sentences. Again, shifting the focus onto male victims. Stephen Port drugged, sexually abused, and killed 4 young homosexual men in East London between June 2014 and September 2015, which led to him being called by the nickname Grindr Killer as he approached his victims on the infamous dating app. On a different wavelength than the other serial killers, Stephen decided to deny his crimes altogether.
It might help if I show you a picture. I'll call this CRT. See, this is Jack Taylor. Do you recognise that, mate?
Full attention to the guy's faces when I've paid attention to the parties.
The officer shows him a picture of his victim, Jack Taylor, and it's unsettling to watch how Stephen stares at the picture for the longest while before lying that he doesn't recognize him. In reality, he had administered fatal doses of GHB, also known as the date rape drug, to Taylor, which led to his demise. Stephen Port was subsequently sentenced to life in prison for his crimes. Lastly, the roadside strangler, Michael Bruce Ross, was an American serial killer who killed 8 women and raped 7 out of those 8 victims. Surprisingly, during a failed attack on a pregnant policewoman, he winded up getting arrested for assault. However, he was released and continued on his killing spree. In this eerie interview, Michael can be seen bragging about his crimes.
Well, I'm a serial killer. I've killed 8 women, 6 in this state and 2 in New York. I'm not a big serial killer, by the way. 8 people, that's nothing. I mean, there's a lot of other guys you can go see.
It is sickening to watch Michael talk about 8 murders nonchalantly, as if the number of people you've killed determines how great you are. After this, he explains how he killed one of his victims.
I saw this woman walking along the road with a stroller. I pulled off the side of the road. She saw me and I grabbed her. I told her that if she didn't do what I wanted, that I would smash the baby's head against the wall of the house.
Michael goes into horrifying details of how he threatened the life of the baby of one of his victims, which eventually led to her complying. He further explains how none of the women he assaulted resisted against him, despite him not being a strong guy, but that could be attributed to their fear. Michael Bruce Ross was executed by lethal injection on the 13th of May 2005.